Hey guys! Tonight, we're not heading to cozy taverns or misty battlefields. We're crawling into a hut where the roof weeps. Your breath fogs the air, and the stew has been simmering for 9 days straight. This is winter, but not the aesthetic kind. This is the medieval kind. It's cold, it's quiet, and it absolutely hates you. You probably won't survive this one. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And in the comments, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. There's something oddly reassuring about knowing someone else is awake out there. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You don't choose winter, it chooses you. Or more accurately, it forgets to leave. There's no official start. It begins with a chill that lingers a bit too long. A dampness in the air that settles into your joints. The chickens stop squawking so much. The wind changes direction. The sun gets shy. And just like that, you're in it. By December, the world outside is whispering in a language you don't want to understand. Everything becomes quiet, but not peaceful quiet. The kind that presses against your ears like bad news you're trying to ignore. Snow arrives not with ceremony, but with indifference. One morning, it's there. A thin, mocking layer over the fields. Like nature's way of saying, hope you weren't using that ground for anything. You still try to pretend it's just a cold snap. You wear the same clothes, now with a cloak that's 40% holes and 60% regrets. You'll fix it later. You always say that. You won't. Not because you're lazy, but because the threads run out and your fingers feel like someone else's. Preparation. A myth. You meant to fix the roof. You meant to chop more wood. You meant to gather more turnips. But then the rains came early. Your neighbor borrowed your axe and didn't return it. And the goose chased you into the compost pile again. So, here you are, underprepared, overexposed, and trying to convince yourself you can ration optimism like firewood. The first week's not too bad. You convince yourself that sleeping in your clothes is cozy, that sharing a blanket with 3 siblings is charming, that the faint smell of goat is part of the ambiance. But then the wind starts speaking in full sentences. It slips through the walls, taps on the beams, curls up around your ankles. You respond by stuffing straw into every crevice, draping cloth over the door, and praying that moss counts as insulation. It doesn't. Your bed is a pile of straw and wool sacks rearranged nightly in pursuit of that one warm spot. You lie there listening to the wind, the animals, the snores, and the occasional unexplained creak that you tell yourself is just the house settling. Even though, medieval houses don't settle, they give up. You light the fire carefully, not because it's sacred, but because wood is limited, and smoke fills the house faster than heat. There's no chimney, just a hole in the thatch that also lets in snow, birds, and occasionally the neighbor's cat. The fire burns low, barely enough to toast your fingers and dry your socks, assuming you still have both. Outside, things start disappearing. First the path swallowed by snowdrifts, then the water source frozen solid, now requiring a dance with death on a patch of ice while carrying a bucket. Then, the concept of time. Days blur together. Mornings are just darker versions of nights. You start measuring time in firewood bundles and how many eggs the hens didn't lay. Inside, your world shrinks. The hut is crowded, loud, and smells like a stew made of regrets. Everyone tries to stay cheerful, but the jokes dry up. Even the dog looks depressed. There's always one uncle who tells ghost stories like that helps. It doesn't, especially when the privy is across the yard and your lantern keeps going out halfway there. You run, but you still hear something in the bushes. It was probably a squirrel, Probably. Still, there's a strange kind of rhythm to it all. You rise with the smoke and sleep when the fire dies. You stir the same pot with the same spoon and the same sense of culinary despair. You repair what breaks, patch what tears, and avoid stepping on the chicken that's decided your bed is now her bed. And then there's the event everyone talks about, but no one names the winter of 1315. The crops drowned, the rains didn't stop, and famine swept through like a bored tyrant. Entire villages vanished. Parents chose who got the last crust of bread. People whispered about things that polite company doesn't repeat. Even now, you remember the stories in hushed tones. You don't talk about the details. You just call it that year. Historians still debate whether the famine was caused entirely by weather or a combination of economic mismanagement and feudal taxes. You, however, are too busy counting turnips to care about macroeconomics. A little-known fact: some people tried eating moss. Spoiler: it's not filling, and it's not great for your digestion. But when the stew is down to water, one bean, and a prayer, moss starts to look like garnish. So here you are, wrapped in 3 cloaks, 2 siblings, and the lingering smell of sheep, listening to the wind ask questions you don't want to answer. Winter doesn't care about your plans. It doesn't care that your boots have holes or that the roof leaks directly over your bed. It doesn't negotiate. It arrives, and it stays, and you endure, because that's what you do. The roof leaks, and so do you. It doesn't start with a dramatic collapse. That would almost be merciful. No. It begins with a drip, just one, right above your sleeping mat. You ignore it. Of course you do, because what else are you going to do? Then another drip, then a chill spreading through the straw under your back. Slow and accusing. You shift to the left. The drip follows. Your medieval house is not so much a structure as it is a general agreement between mud, sticks, and prayer. Wattle and daub. They call it a lovely term for walls made of sticks woven together and smeared with a mixture of mud, straw, manure, and hope. Supposedly, it keeps out the wind. Historians still debate how effective it really was. Most peasants would argue. Define effective. Some people tried adding layers, whitewashing the inside, hanging old cloaks on the wall, stuffing the cracks with moss or bits of old sheep fleece. But wind is stubborn. It finds its way in, through the seams in the roof and the hole that pretends to be a window. And once it's in, it makes itself at home rattling doors, stirring the fire, whispering bedtime threats directly into your ear. The thatched roof above your head. Romantic in paintings. In practice, it's dried grass. With enough snow, it sags. With enough rain, it becomes a sponge. With enough bad luck, it caves in while you're mid-spoonful of beet soup. You learn to keep a bucket handy, then 2, then 6. You position them like a sad kind of weather-based board game. Each one has a name, a history, a leak that always finds it again. The floor doesn't help. It's dirt, sometimes mud. In the spring, it's a swamp. In winter, it freezes into something between concrete and despair. You try spreading straw over it, but that only lasts a day before it becomes a soggy, moldy mash of smells you stop identifying. If it's dry, it turns to dust, which then becomes seasoning in your soup. Your bed is also the floor, maybe slightly raised, maybe not. Straw-filled sacks flatter every week, blankets made from wool, or if you're unlucky, damp linen. You sleep fully dressed, curled like a pretzel, one arm around the baby and one eye on the drip forming above your head. And then there's the smell. Not a single smell, a committee. Damp wool, wet animal, lingering smoke, unwashed bodies, and the occasional burst of something yeasty. A little-known fact: early medieval peasants would often rub herbs into their clothes to mask odors. Lavender, if you could find it. More often, just handfuls of mint or thyme, tied around your neck like a medieval deodorant necklace. You try it. It helps. Briefly, one night, something falls from the thatch onto your face. You don't scream. There are sleeping children nearby, but you do experience a full existential moment. Was it a twig? A beetle? The reincarnation of your bad decisions. You don't check. You just roll over and pray it doesn't crawl. And yet, somehow, this is still better than being outside. Because outside, it's worse. Your neighbor's roof collapsed entirely last week. The family's been staying in the grain shed, arguing about who snores loudest and what counts as private time. You offered them space, briefly forgetting you only have about 20 square feet, not already occupied by humans. Goats or buckets. The goats, for their part, are unimpressed. They resent being inside, but they resent the cold more. One has taken a liking to the hearth. The other two have decided your bed smells like home. You try to evict them. They blink at you, chew, and lie down harder. You lose. Again. Somehow, despite all this, life continues. You sweep, pointlessly. The dirt just rearranges itself. You patch walls with whatever you can find: sticks, old belts, even a flattened wooden spoon that snapped mid-pottage stir. You develop a routine of pretending everything is normal. This is just what houses do. You tell yourself, they leak, they smell, they shift in the night, and occasionally drop insects into your hair. Perfectly ordinary. There's an old saying you heard once: a house is only as strong as its weakest beam. You don't know who said it. Probably someone who never had to sleep under one. You've got 3 beams you actively distrust. One creaks when the wind blows. One groans when the fire is lit. One doesn't make any noise at all anymore, which somehow worries you more. During a particularly rough storm, the wind peels back part of the roof like it's opening a tin can. You climb up to fix it the next morning, fingers shaking, breath fogging, knees slipping. Your ladder is a collection of logs tied together with twine and optimism. Your repair kit consists of a rock, a dull knife, and a piece of rope that used to be part of a pig harness. Historians still argue over how common proper home repair was among peasants. Some say they constantly maintained their homes, patching and fixing as needed. Others argue most people simply didn't have the time or resources. You suspect the truth is somewhere in the middle, and under a tarp held down by a bucket of bricks. The only real improvement is when you seal a major crack with a lump of clay stolen from the riverbank and reinforced with sheep dung. It holds, for now. You name it, the wall that tried. It's your favorite part of the house. At night, when the fire burns low and the cold rises from the floor like an unwelcome ghost, you find yourself thanking the roof. Not because it's strong, not because it's good, but because it's still there. Mostly, the fire wants everything. You start the day thinking maybe, just maybe, this morning will be easier, that the fire didn't go out, that the embers are still there, faintly glowing under the ash, like a secret you've kept warm overnight. You shuffle across the icy floor, prod the hearth with a stick, and nothing. Cold, gray, indifferent ash. The fire didn't just die. It packed up and left without saying goodbye. Now you have to start it again. Flint, steel, kindling if you have it, desperation if you don't. Your fingers are too stiff to strike properly. The first few sparks miss. The next few land but refuse to catch. The last spark finally finds a piece of old straw, and you breathe on it like it's your last hope. because it is. Fire is your god now, not metaphorically. It's the only thing that keeps the cold at bay, that cooks your food, and that dries your socks, that lights your one-room world for a few precious hours each night. You give it everything. Wood, scraps, dung, sticks, your last good spoon once. In a moment of panic, the fire accepts your offerings with a hiss and a curl of smoke and then demands more. You spend hours each week just collecting what it needs. And that's the easy part. Cutting is harder. You chop logs until your arms feel like wet noodles and your fingers forget how to bend. Your axe is old, blunt, and chipped, and the handle creaks like a dying tree every time you swing. You split the logs wrong half the time, sending jagged shards in every direction, including your shin. You say a few choice words. The goat looks offended. You don't cut in the snow, ideally, but ideal doesn't exist anymore. The ground is slippery. The wood is wet. The snow gets inside your boots no matter what you do. You fall twice, once face first, once with a log on your foot. You don't even scream the second time. You just lie there for a moment, listening to the birds that somehow still exist in this frozen nightmare, and think, at least I'm not cold right now. Back inside, the fire finally catches. You feed it slowly, carefully. Too much wood and it smokes you out. Not enough and it dies again. You can't afford to waste even the bad wood, the kind that hisses and spits and smells like regret. You use it anyway. You've even started burning fence posts and old furniture. That three-legged stool no one liked. It was flammable. Now it's warm. Historians often romanticize the hearth as the center of the medieval home. They're not wrong. It is, but not because it's picturesque. Because without it, the home doesn't function. It's not just the heart, it's the lungs, the stomach, the only thing that separates you from frostbite at 3 a.m. When the wind outside is pretending to be a pack of wolves. A little-known fact. Some people in Northern Europe used to bank their fires at night by covering the embers with ash. This kept the coals warm without burning fuel. You tried it once. It worked. Sort of. The fire survived. But so did the smell. You coughed for 2 days. The fire has moods. Sometimes it burns high and hot, practically daring you to cook something ambitious. You think about pancakes. You remember you have no flour. You make boiled turnips again. Sometimes it sulks, barely more than a glow, flickering like it's offended you personally. You kneel beside it and apologize with a pine cone and a broken broom handle. It considers, then it flickers harder. You plan your entire day around it. You cook everything while it's burning strong, then wrap leftovers in cloth and hide them near the stones. You rotate your socks near it. You dry your cloak. You hover close enough to feel your eyelashes curl, but not so close that your tunic starts to smoke. You've done that once. You still smell it when you dream. Fire is also social currency. Your neighbor visits, ostensibly to check on the goats, but really just to warm his hands. He compliments your stacking. You grunt. He tries to casually lean in closer. You move the pot so he gets the smoke side. He takes the hint. Historians still argue about whether communal fire arrangements existed outside larger towns. Some say yes, shared ovens, central hearths, fire circles. Others argue that individual families guarded their fires with fierce pride and secrecy. You understand both. Fire is life. It's also leverage. When you have it, you're not just warm, you're powerful. At night, you sit near the hearth, half awake, watching the flames like they might whisper secrets. They never do, but they crackle just enough to drown out the sound of the wind trying to break into your walls. You stare until your eyes blur. The red glow reflects in the goat's eyes. She blinks. You blink back. You're not sure who's watching who. You go to bed with one arm outstretched toward the warmth, your feet tucked beneath someone else's knees, the fire dying down like a lullaby. It will go out again. It always does. But for now, it glows. And that's enough to believe, for just a little while, that you'll survive the night. You're not hungry. You're hollow. You wake up not with the grumble of missed breakfast, but with the ache of something deeper, something like absence. It lives in your belly like a tenant that refuses to move out, whispering its complaints at all hours. You shift under the blankets, bones pressing against bones, and try not to think about the fact that you went to bed chewing a piece of bark you pretended was chewy bread. Hunger doesn't arrive suddenly. It builds, quietly, like frost on a window, like moss on a roof beam. It becomes part of you, a second heartbeat, a low, constant reminder that there's less today than yesterday, and even less tomorrow. The stew's already on. It's always on. That pot has been boiling for 3 weeks, maybe 4. You've stopped counting. You just keep adding to it. Root vegetables when you have them, old bones if they're lying around, a handful of herbs that don't technically make things taste better, but at least make them taste like something. The fire murmurs beneath the pot, like it's judging your choices. It probably is. You ladle out a scoop. It's mostly liquid. Maybe a chunk or two of something formerly nutritious. A piece of turnip, a sliver of onion, the ghost of a lentil. You stare at it. You eat it. You don't taste it. You don't care. Historians often describe pottage as a peasant staple. That's like calling a rope a climbing tool when it's actually the only thing keeping you from falling into despair. Pottage is whatever's left. It's not a recipe. It's an apology. You remember meat, vaguely. Someone slaughtered a pig last fall, smoked the bits, salted the rest. You had a slice once, a glorious, thin, chewy slice that tasted like victory. It's gone now. The pig is long gone. The smell still haunts the rafters. A little-known fact. In particularly harsh winters, people used to chew leather, not as a snack, as a survival tactic. Belts, shoes, anything soft enough to gnaw. You haven't gotten there yet, but you have eyed your bootstraps. Just in case. The grain stores are low. You know this because you've checked the sacks 5 times this week, hoping for a surprise handful of barley to fall out like a miracle. No luck. You're down to the ugly oats, the ones even the chickens look at with disdain. You soak them, mash them, boil them, stretch them. You make flatbread that cracks teeth and porridge that tastes like sadness. But you eat it anyway. Hunger doesn't have preferences. The chickens have stopped laying. They're too cold. They huddle near the hearth, like little feathered freeloaders, giving you side eyes and refusing to contribute. You get maybe 1 egg a week, 2 if you flatter them. You whisper to them softly. You bribe them with extra scraps. You threaten the rooster. He crows louder. You swear back. There's no fruit. Vegetables are gone. Maybe you have some pickled cabbage left, but it tastes like defeat and vinegar. You tried fermenting a turnip once. You're still recovering emotionally. You think about bread, fresh bread, soft bread, the kind with actual flour and yeast, and not the weird greenish lump that you slapped together last week using barley. A dream. And something you're pretty sure was sawdust. It's a distant memory now, the kind that makes your teeth ache just remembering it. Historians still debate how much actual bread the average medieval peasant ate in winter. Some argue it was constant. Others suggest it was reserved for better times. You suspect it depended on whether or not your neighbor had borrowed your flour again. Spoiler. They did. You once found an old crust under the bed. You dusted it off. Considered your options. Ate it anyway. It tasted like broom bristles and childhood trauma. Sometimes, if you're really desperate, you fish. The stream isn't entirely frozen, but it's close. You crack through the ice with a rock, dangle a line you made from twisted thread, and wait, and wait. And then your fingers go numb, and then you lose the thread, and then the rooster crows at you mockingly from the porch. You trudge back home, empty-handed, hungrier, colder. Dinner is more pottage, more broth, a tiny slab of something you call meat, but no one asks questions about. The fire crackles, your stomach echoes. You chew slowly, not for flavor, but to trick your brain into thinking there's more. Afterward, you scrape the pot, every drop, every bit of boiled mystery stuck to the sides. You lick the ladle. You catch your cousin doing the same and pretend not to notice. You don't judge. Tomorrow, you'll do the same. A neighbor once mentioned mushrooms. Foraging. They called it romantic idea. Until you remember the time last winter when someone picked the wrong kind and spent 3 days seeing angels in the outhouse. You decide you're not that hungry. Yet, you go to bed lightheaded, not dizzy, just missing something. Like someone stole a part of you and replaced it with wind. Your dreams are full of roasted goose and pies the size of your head. You wake up chewing your blanket. And the worst part, this is a good year. No famine, no failed harvest, no marauding bandits torching the fields. Just a regular, run-of-the-mill medieval winter. Which means this isn't the worst it gets. This is standard. You stare into the fire. You feel the hollowness curl up beside you. Familiar now. Like an old friend who never leaves. And you remind yourself, you're not starving. You're just surviving. And those are not the same thing. Sickness doesn't knock. It slinks in. You wake up with a scratch in your throat. Nothing serious. You tell yourself, just the cold air. Just the smoke. Just the usual collection of unfiltered particles swirling in your lungs like tiny, angry peasants. But by midday, your joints ache, your nose leaks, and your skin feels like it's trying to escape your body. You've been chosen. Congratulations. There's no doctor, not in the modern sense. There's old Marta who knows which herbs won't kill you, and a priest who thinks your illness is a spiritual failing. Both are equally helpful in their own unique ways. You're left with a pot of boiled weeds and a suggestion to pray harder. You do both. Neither works. Everyone in the house is coughing, deep, rattling, phlegmy coughs that echo in the rafters like a choir of distress. No one covers their mouths, not because they're rude, but because it's the 1300s and no one's invented hygiene yet. You've wiped your nose with your sleeve so many times, it's become a second nostril. The fire helps, a little, when it's burning well. The warmth loosens the chill in your chest, but the smoke doesn't help your lungs, nor does sleeping with your head 2 feet from a chicken. The goat sneezes once and everyone gets nervous. You try to work anyway. There's no such thing as a sick day. Firewood still needs splitting. Water needs fetching. The children need feeding, even if all they get is broth made from hope and hot water. You trudge through your chores like a plague ghost, wrapped in every piece of wool you own and sweating under the strain of pretending you're fine. Historians still argue over whether most medieval illnesses were bacterial or viral. You argue with your own body about whether your right lung is still functioning. You cough. It responds with a sound that might be Latin for not really. A well-known historical moment sneaks into your fever dreams. The Black Death. You don't know what it is. Not really. You just remember stories. A town where bells never stopped ringing. A priest who buried 300 bodies and then disappeared. A neighbor who left to find medicine and returned with silence. You try not to think about it too hard. Not every cough is a death sentence. Probably a lesser-known fact, a Some people believed illness came from bad smells. Miasma, they called it. So they carried around little bags of herbs or vinegar-soaked cloths to ward it off. You try it. All it does is make you smell like pickled disappointment. Someone suggests leeches. You decline, gently, then not so gently. Then with a firm, I'd rather be sick. Thanks. They nod. Clearly disappointed they won't get to dig around in your veins with a pondworm. You sip herbal tea, nettle. Mostly, it tastes like mud strained through sadness. You pretend it helps. You wrap a hot rock in cloth and place it on your chest. It works. Until the rock cools down and becomes just another lump of nature sitting on your sternum. When your fever peaks, you sweat through your clothes and the mattress. You hallucinate something about Saint Bridget holding a turnip and singing. Your spouse mops your forehead with a rag that was recently a dishcloth. It smells faintly of onions and mercy. You whisper a thank you, or you think you do. You don't sleep. You drift, in and out of dreams, in and out of awareness, hovering in that liminal space where the cold no longer matters because your bones are cooking themselves. When you wake, it's because a chicken sat on your chest and laid an egg. The egg rolls off. You cry a little, out of gratitude. Recovery is slow. You're not better, you're just less bad. You still cough. Your nose still leaks. But your hands stop shaking, and your knees remember how to hold your weight. You get out of bed and nearly pass out. You sit for a minute and try again. No one claps. There are no congratulations. There's just another pot to stir, another log to carry, another child to scold for drawing pictures in the soot on the wall. Life doesn't pause while you're sick. It just gets slightly worse until you catch up. Your voice cracks when you speak. No one notices. Everyone's hoarse. It's winter. You sound like the wind. You fit right in. Historians debate whether herbal remedies truly worked, or if survival was just a matter of luck. You suspect both. You thank the tea. You thank your body. You thank the goat, for reasons you're not ready to unpack. Some people don't get better. An old man 2 houses over went to sleep and didn't wake up. They wrapped him in a cloak, said some Latin over his body, and buried him in the frozen ground with a pickaxe and 2 shovels. You didn't attend the service. You were too busy trying not to sneeze yourself into unconsciousness. You keep going. You chop more wood. You scrub the floor. You cough into the fire and pretend it's gone. It's not. But it's quieter now. Tamer. Like something wild that decided you weren't worth the effort. Sickness doesn't leave. It lingers. Like smoke in the beams. Like mildew in the walls. It becomes part of you. A reminder that you're still fragile. Still human. Still living in a world that doesn't care how tired you are. But you're here. You're upright. You stir the stew with your left hand and blow your nose with your right. You pet the goat and hope she doesn't sneeze again. You survive, not because you're strong, but because the alternative isn't an option. You don't live with animals. You live among them. It starts as a necessity. The cold presses in. The fire doesn't reach the corners. And warmth becomes a form of currency. The animals offer it, not generously, not politely, but reliably. So you let them in. Not all at once. That would be chaos. But a few at a time, like guests who don't know when to leave. The first is the dog. She's old, half deaf, and smells like wet hay and broken promises. She curls near the hearth like she owns it. You step over her 5 times a day and once into her, which results in a grumble and a stare so judgmental, you briefly question your place in the family hierarchy. Then the goats. You didn't plan on the goats being indoor creatures, but the storm changed that. One night of snow, and you find them huddled against the door, looking at you like you're the villain in a moral play. You open the door. They waltz in, One climbs onto the stool. One eats the laundry. The other sniffs your bed and makes a decision you can't stop in time. Soon the chickens follow. At first, they perch along the edge of the wall. Then they start exploring. Then they decide laying eggs directly next to your head at dawn is the height of domestic convenience. It is not, but you thank them anyway. Cows, if you have one, usually stay outside. They're large, opinionated, and prone to knocking things over with their hips. But during a particularly brutal cold snap, you clear out the lean-to, lay down fresh straw, and she moves in like she's been waiting for the invitation. She moos at odd hours, chews loudly, and once sneezes directly into the soup pot. You pretend you didn't see it? Historians still debate how common it was for peasants to share space with livestock. Some argue it was routine part of the house layout. Even others suggest it was desperation-driven and seasonal. In your hut, it's not just common, it's required. The animals aren't guests. They're insulation. A little-known fact: pigs, despite their reputation, are excellent heaters. You lie next to one once, after a particularly long night of freezing rain, and wake up warmer than you've been in weeks, also covered in pig hair. You count it as a win. You rearrange the space constantly, move the stool, shift the firestones, scoot the bedroll away from the latest pile of droppings. There's no such thing as clean, only less dirty. You sweep, yes, but straw returns, feathers multiply, hoofprints appear like mystery art on the floor. You start naming things. Not the animals, you already did that. No! You name the smells. Smoky goat, stewed dirt, burnt wool with chicken. You develop a kind of internal scent map. You know where to stand, to smell only fire and hope. It's a very small corner. The sounds become part of your lullaby. The rooster shifting on the beam, the goat muttering in her sleep, the cow sighing with the weight of existence. Someone farts, human or animal. You don't ask. You just roll over and try to sleep before the next moo echoes into your dreams. Your children adapt faster than you do. They befriend the chickens, ride the goats, argue over who gets to brush the cow. You worry they're getting too comfortable, that they'll forget. This isn't normal. But then again, maybe it is. One night, you wake up because something is staring at you. It's the dog. Her eyes reflect the firelight in a way that's deeply unsettling. She blinks. You blink. She curls back into a circle and sighs like she's judging your entire life. You consider apologizing. You don't. Another night. The rooster decides 3 is morning. He crows. Everyone groans. The goat bleats. The baby cries. You throw a boot at the wall. It hits nothing. You all go back to sleep. The animals give back in their way. Eggs, milk, warmth, company. But they take things too. Your space, your blankets, your dignity. You step in things you can't identify. You sit on a bench and find it's already warm. You don't ask why. There's a strange comfort in it. Though, the sense that life goes on, that not everything has frozen, that somewhere in this drafty pile of mud and straw, things are still breathing, eating, snoring, living. It's chaotic, messy, smelly life. But it's life. A historical event crosses your mind. The Great Famine of 1315. Crops failed. Animals starved. People died. And those who survived often did so by sharing space, sharing breath, sharing body heat with the very creatures they usually kept at a distance. The line between barn and bedroom blurred. It was ugly. It was survival. You look around your crowded, steaming, clucking hut and realize you've crossed that line too. You no longer have a house. You have a habitat. You adjust. You stop flinching at every sound. You stop apologizing when you bump into a goat in the dark. You stop trying to keep the feathers out of your soup. You just stir gently and pretend they're seasoning. When spring comes, and it will, you'll move the animals out again. You'll sweep, scrub, mutter things about cleanliness and order, but you'll miss them a little. The warmth, the noise, the sense that you are never quite alone in the dark. Because in the dead of winter, when the walls groan and the wind sings lullabies in a language only the wolves understand, even a pig snoring next to your fire is better than silence. The cold doesn't care who you are. But people do. You're huddled under a blanket that's less textile and more thread-based memory. Your fingers are numb. Your breath curls like smoke. And you hear footsteps outside. Not the dangerous kind, not yet. Just the slow, deliberate crunch of boots on frozen ground. Someone important is coming. You can tell by how little they care about being quiet. You open the door. It's your landlord. Or maybe your liege lord. Or his steward. It changes depending on how many cups of wine he's had. He's wrapped in furs, draped in authority, and followed by a man who writes things down on parchment and pretends to be bored. You bow, like your knees haven't already been compromised by a week of hauling frozen buckets uphill. He smiles, the way someone smiles when they know you owe them everything. And then he asks about your tithe, your labor, your willingness to work another day voluntarily. You nod. You say yes. You don't say what you're really thinking, which is that your cousin just lost a finger to frostbite. And you're down to one usable axe. Hierarchies don't freeze in winter. If anything, they sharpen. The people above you still expect the same work, the same obedience, the same bowed heads even as your boots leak and your roof caves. They stay warm. You stay grateful. Or you pretend to. A historical moment floats to mind. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381. It's decades away. But the seeds are already there, planted every time someone like you is told to give more while holding less. Every time someone is taxed for the firewood they chopped with their own frozen hands. Every time someone is punished for poaching a rabbit, they needed more than the Lord's hunting dog did. You've heard stories of lords who punish theft with branding, of stewards who take a portion of your grain and then show up asking for ale, of punishments that don't fit crimes, because crimes aren't real when the system decides what counts. A little-known fact, in some regions, peasants had to pay a fee just to use the village mill. Even if they grew the grain, even if they carried it on their backs for miles, they still owed a cut. You once tried grinding your oats with a rock and a flat piece of slate. You still have the blisters. And yet, the expectations continue. Your tools must be sharp. Your rent paid in full. Your animals counted and taxed. Your work demanded without complaint. And if you're lucky, maybe you get to keep the worst corner of your worst field for planting beans. The steward leaves. No thank you. No good day. Just the sound of his boots on the snow and the scribble of judgment etched into a scroll. You shut the door and immediately feel colder. Like the heat left with him. You sit near the fire, trying not to feel small. But small is what winter makes of everyone, especially those without power, especially those who kneel more than they stand. Historians still debate whether lords were always cruel or simply indifferent. You suspect the difference doesn't matter when your family is hungry and your tools are broken and the right to gather wood was revoked because someone poached a deer last summer. You've seen what happens to those who complain. A boy who spoke out lost his place in the line for grain. An old woman refused to bow fast enough and was corrected by a soldier who didn't even bother to remember her name. You learn not to speak. You learn the exact depth of a bow that says respect without saying, I'm broken. But not everyone enforces cruelty. There's the blacksmith's daughter, who sometimes gives you offcuts of iron by accident. There's the baker who adds an extra crust of bread to your basket when no one's looking. There are whispers of a priest 2 towns over who preaches that God frowns on greed. You wonder how long he'll last. You think of the stories your grandfather told, of kings who walked among their people, of nobles who lifted peasants out of poverty, of justice. But then again, he also thought onions cured curses. So you take those tales with a pinch of salt and a full dose of reality. You still try to be honorable. You still give what's required. You still show up when called. Not because you believe in the system, but because rebellion is a luxury only warm people can afford. Later that night, someone knocks again. This time it's your neighbor. He's limping. His wife's ill. He asks for a log, just one. You glance at your pile dwindling, pitiful. Your own survival carved into uneven chunks, and you give him one anyway. Not because you have enough, but because you know how it feels to need, and that, perhaps, is the only power winter gives the powerless. The ability to help each other when the system won't. You fall asleep thinking of the steward's boots, the priest's whispers, the neighbor's gratitude. You dream of a world where warmth isn't taxed and kindness isn't dangerous. But for now, you just survive, because no one above you will do it for you. Food storage is a gamble with mold. Preserving food for winter isn't a skill, it's a year-round panic. You start in spring, planting whatever the land agrees to grow. Then you harvest it in autumn, racing against early frosts, rodents, and the kind of weather that ruins everything in a single rainy week. You dry it, salt it, smoke it, bury it, hang it, pickle it, and then you pray. You pray because preservation is not protection. The root cellar might keep things cold, but it won't keep them safe. Potatoes rot from the inside. Turnips grow soft spots that look innocent but taste like betrayal. Carrots split like they're trying to escape their own skin. You learn to sniff everything. You knock on tubers like they owe you an answer. If they sound hollow, they're lying. You open a sack of beans and find weevils. Again, you sift them out. Again, you pretend you're not finding eggs. You pretend you don't notice one still moving. You close the bag, take a breath, and remind yourself that protein is protein. The smoked meat smells off. You scrape the green parts. You boil it until the flavor is memory. Everyone eats in silence. You don't say it out loud, but you all think it. If no one's sick by morning, it's fine. A well-known event crosses your mind, the Great Famine of 1315. Rain drowned the crops. Mold bloomed in granaries. Even the nobles starved. People ate leaves, bark, the flesh of animals long since dead. Some even ate things you don't talk about. You weren't there, but your grandfather was, or at least, he said he was. The lines between stories and memories blur after a while. You still remember when your mother taught you how to salt pork. Thick slabs, rubbed with salt until your fingers cracked, layered in barrels with more salt than meat, left in the cellar with a cloth cover and a whispered hope that no rat found it first. You go check now, the barrel's still there, lighter than it should be, suspiciously lighter. You open it slowly, like you're disarming a trap. The top layer is fine, dry, grainy. The second layer, softer. You don't dig any deeper. You close it and decide you'll wait until the stew gets desperate enough. A little-known fact: medieval people used to bury cheese in ash to preserve it. Not store it, bury it. Ash draws out the moisture and, in theory, keeps it from going rancid. You try it once. The cheese survives. You don't eat it. It looks like it made a deal with something dark and ancient. Pickling helps. Vinegar's magic, in its own angry way. Cabbage, onions, Garlic, if you can spare them, jarred in stone pots and left to ferment until they're tangy, sharp, and mildly terrifying. One batch exploded last year, covered the ceiling in what looked like vegetable regret. You scrubbed for hours. You also dry things. Herbs hang from the rafters like herbal chandeliers. Apples sliced thin, strung like garlands, slowly hardening into chewy discs of concentrated sweetness. You hoard them, hide them, forget where you put them. Find one in March and weep quietly into your sleeve. And then there's the bread. Winter bread is not fresh bread. It's dense, dark, sometimes sour. You bake big loaves and let them go stale on purpose. Stale bread lasts longer. You reheat it in broth, soak it in milk, gnaw on it like regret in crust form. You never waste a crumb. The dog gets the burnt edges. The chickens get the crumbs. You eat the middle, no matter what texture it's become. You remember the story of St. Cuthbert, who once fasted through winter with only dry bread and water. You try to channel that same spiritual strength when your dinner is half an onion and a piece of bark you claim is herbal. Historians still argue how much food a typical peasant had stored by winter. Some say enough to last until spring. Others say starvation was routine, expected, even normal. You don't argue. You just count the jars on the shelf and calculate how many weeks you can go without chewing a shoe. The salt is running low. You were supposed to trade for more last month, but the merchant didn't come. Or maybe he did, and he skipped your house because you forgot to bow last time. Either way, you're down to scraping crystals off the sides of old barrels and pretending it's seasoning. The grain sack has a hole. You patch it. Another hole appears. Micey. You set a trap. It fails. You curse quietly. The priest says swearing invites demons. You say demons are already here and they're chewing through your wheat. You share what you can. When a neighbor brings a jar of pickled beets, you offer a piece of dried apple. It's not generous. It's survival math. If they starve, you might be next. If they don't, maybe they'll bring eggs in spring. You dream of abundance, of storerooms overflowing, of pies. P.S. The idea is so ludicrous you laugh out loud once. The goat looks at you with concern, and yet, every day, you open the cellar door. You check the jars, sniff the barrels, rearrange the sacks like it makes a difference. You measure what's left. You ration. You sacrifice. You scrape off the mold. You boil it again. You serve it anyway. Because winter doesn't care what's in the pot. It only cares that you don't stop stirring. Silence is louder in the snow. You don't notice it at first. Not really. The snow just muffles things. The clatter of tools, the cluck of hens, the dog's bark all softened, swallowed into the white hush that stretches from the fields to the rooftops. But then you step outside one morning, and it hits you like a forgotten memory. The world has stopped making noise. There's no wind, no birds, no footsteps except your own. Even your breath feels like it's being absorbed by the air. You crunch forward. That crunch is the loudest thing you've heard all day. You say a word just to hear it echo. It doesn't. The snow eats it. And in that silence, everything feels a little too real. The weight of your coat, the ache in your knees, the way your hands can't unclench anymore. It's all sharper, more noticeable. Like someone turned up the detail slider on existence. You walk through the village like a ghost. Doors are shut. Chimneys smoke in tired wisps. You pass the well and hear nothing but the creak of the old rope swaying gently. No one's drawn water in hours, maybe longer. Historians sometimes talk about the seasonal dormancy of medieval life as if winter was a nap. It's not. It's a pause with teeth. Work still happens. Fires still burn. But underneath it all, there's this breath-holding quality. like the earth itself is waiting for something to change. A little-known fact: some villagers used to hang bells on their doors in winter, not for decoration, but so they'd know if anyone opened them. When everyone's huddled inside and footsteps vanish in snow, even a soft chime can mean the difference between safety and surprise. You visit the animals. They blink slowly, their world even smaller than yours. The goats barely bleat. The cow doesn't even look up. You feed them, scratch behind an ear, and whisper a joke you barely understand yourself. The silence replies. Back inside, the quiet settles over everything like a second layer of frost. No one speaks unless they must. Words cost warmth. Even the children are subdued. They draw shapes in the soot on the walls. You watch one spell bred and erase it quickly, embarrassed. You've never noticed how loud the fire is. The crackling, the hissing when snow-damp logs hit the flame. It's the soundtrack of your life now. Every pop makes someone flinch. The baby wakes up crying at one sharp snap. You rock them back to sleep, whispering lullabies that your own mother sang in winters just like this. And then comes night, deeper than before, the kind of dark that eats light whole. You light one candle, just one. Any more would feel disrespectful. The shadows stretch. The wind hasn't returned. But you swear you hear something in the rafters. Probably the cat. Hopefully the cat. A historical moment shivers into your mind. The Norse concept of Fimbulwinter, a winter so long and cold, it heralds the end of the world. You don't believe in Ragnarok. Exactly. But you understand the fear that such a silence could mean something is broken in the bones of the world. Someone knocks. You freeze. Not because you're scared, but because it's the first sound from outside in 2 days. It's your neighbor. He holds out a bundle of twigs, kindling. His face is pale, his eyes red from smoke or sleeplessness or both. He doesn't speak. He just nods. You nod back. He leaves. No one says a word. You add the twigs to the fire. The flame brightens. Someone exhales, deep and slow, like a prayer. Later, when the kids are asleep and the animals have settled and the stew has stopped pretending to be nutritious, you step outside again, just for a moment, just to check. The snow glows faintly in the moonlight. Your footprints have crusted over. No new ones join them. The wind hasn't come back. The silence still holds. You stand there, listening. To the nothing, to everything. A dog barks far off. One bark, then nothing. You let yourself believe that's enough. Because sometimes, in winter, even a single sound can mean you're not alone. Time doesn't pass, it plods. You stopped counting days weeks ago. Calendars are for monks and merchants. Out here, time's measured in chores. How many buckets since the last thaw? How many logs since the roof last leaked? How many stews since anything tasted like food? You mark time by routine, and even that's starting to blur. You wake, work, eat, work again, squint at the darkening sky, then sleep beneath a blanket of creaking beams and cold breath. Days no longer arrive, they repeat. There's no clock. The sun rises late, sulks behind gray clouds, and slips away like it's avoiding eye contact. You tell morning by the frost patterns on the window cloth. You tell evening by how many times you've stirred the stew. Everything else is guesswork, and the work never changes. Fetch water, feed animals, mend clothes, patch walls, gather wood, turn compost, start again. It's not that it's difficult, it's that it never ends. You do the same things. So often you start to feel like background furniture in your own life. A historical event seeps into your numb fingers. The invention of the mechanical clock tower in the 13th century revolutionized urban timekeeping. Schedules, bells, routine. You don't have that. You have chickens. When they cluck, it's noon. When they're silent, it's night. When they scream, something is wrong. A little-known fact. Some peasants used to carry seasonal tokens to help remember time bundles of dried flowers. Carved sticks with notches for each week of fasting. Even colored threads tied to garments. You tried that once. The thread froze, snapped, and you used it to tie up a sack of oats. That's what time does out here. It unravels, then gets repurposed. You don't celebrate birthdays, not because you don't care, but because nobody remembers the exact day. You think your daughter was born near the apple harvest, or maybe during the wheat drying. She asks. You smile and say, soon. She seems satisfied. Even church feasts don't help anymore. Candlemas was last week, or next week, or possibly yesterday. The priest forgot too. He mentioned something about Saint someone, and then coughed for 10 minutes. Your body becomes a calendar. Your joints tell you when it's colder. Your hands crack on Wednesdays. Your back screams every third day before breakfast. You try not to think about what that means. The tasks blur. You scrub the same patch of floor you scrubbed yesterday. You mend a sock and realize it's the same hole you patched last week. You chop the same kind of wood with the same dull axe using the same tired shoulder. Sometimes you catch yourself repeating things. A phrase, a prayer, a complaint, over and over. Like you're a scratched record no one listens to anymore. You start speaking less, just to avoid hearing your own echo. You measure weeks by laundry, every 8 days. You boil water, soak the clothes, beat them against rocks, and pretend they're clean. They're not. They're just damp and less awful. But for a few minutes, they smell like soap root and steam instead of smoke and goat. The kids ask when spring is coming. You shrug. You don't know. Not because you're ignorant, but because spring in this part of the world isn't a season, it's a rumor. Something people whisper about when the icicles start to sweat. Historians argue over whether peasants had leisure time. Some say yes, pointing to festivals and games. Others argue that survival left no space for fun. You say they're both wrong. You have time, but it's the wrong shape. Too ragged to be leisure, too short to be restful, just long enough to feel guilty for not working. Sometimes, just for variety, you walk in a different direction, past the same tree stump, around the same fence. You do it just to remember you're a person with legs, and not just a wood-chopping automaton powered by porridge and spite. You start to track the moon, not because it tells you anything useful, but because it changes, slowly, consistently. A silver coin in a sky full of gray. You whisper to it once, asking how long until the thaw. It doesn't answer. Typical. One evening, someone says they heard a bird. Everyone stares. A bird. In this, you step outside, ears straining. There's nothing, just wind. But for a second, hope sneaks in. And hope is dangerous, because time doesn't really move out here. It circles, it loops, it freezes and thaws and forgets to tell you when something has changed. You're not living through days. You're dragging them behind you like wet cloaks. But you keep doing it, because one of these mornings, the frost will melt. One of these nights, the wind will stop whispering threats and start carrying warmth. You just don't know when. So you work. You stir. You count firewood. You wait, because that's the only clock winter gives you. When the roof collapses, you just move over. There's a drip. You ignore it at first. It's probably melted snow from the last storm, or a hole you already patched with too little pitch and too much hope. But then it happens again. Then again, the sound picks up rhythm, like a cruel little drum beat above your bedroll. You roll over, stare up. The ceiling is sagging. The beam you thought was solid looks tired, like it's been holding up the heavens too long, and has decided today is its last day. You sigh. You've done repairs before. That one summer when everything leaked and the chickens started bathing indoors. You remember balancing on a creaky ladder with mud in your teeth, patching a crack with reeds, twine, and a prayer. You remember being proud of it, like you'd built Rome. That pride didn't age well. The roof gives a groan, wood on wood, like bones cracking in a cold wind, and then part of it sags another inch. You swear softly. The children look up. One of them says, "Should we get the bucket?" You nod. You put the bucket beneath the drip, not because it'll fix anything, but because it's what you do. You catch the water, count the drops, pretend you're staying ahead of the problem. You're not. The drip becomes a trickle. The trickle becomes a puddle. You move the bedding. Again, a well-known historical reality. Medieval homes were not built for longevity. Thatch roofs rotted. Wattle walls bowed. The materials were local, biodegradable, and as ambitious as your energy levels after hauling firewood all day. You built with what you had, and what you had was sticks, mud, and denial. A little-known fact: in some villages, there was a rotating roof crew neighbors who helped patch roofs house by house, a kind of communal, cold-weather barn raising, except with more slipping and swearing. Yours never caught on, probably because everyone's roof is in the same state, collapsing gently, like a tired apology. You try to patch it. You climb up with a bundle of reeds, some twine, and the grim resolve of someone who's not trying to fix the roof, but to delay its betrayal. The wind bites your face. The thatch is frozen. The reed bundle snaps before you even touch the hole. You stare at it for a long moment, then crawl back down. The solution: rearrangement. You don't fix the roof. You just move your life away from the hole. You shift the bedrolls, reorganize the table, pretend the new drip near the fire isn't a problem yet. Your family adapts like water in a cracked jug flowing to whatever shape is left. Historians argue whether peasants cared about their homes the way we care about ours. Of course you care. You built this. You birthed children under this roof. You stored turnips in this floor. But winter teaches you not to romanticize walls. They're temporary, like everything else. You use everything. A torn cloak becomes a ceiling patch. The firewood pile gets redistributed into makeshift props for sagging beams. You once tied a rafter back into place with a length of goat rope and a firm suggestion that it behave itself. The leak keeps spreading. You catch another drip in a cracked bowl. Now your table is 70% furniture, 30% rainfall management system. You start naming the leaks. The one over the stew pot is Old Faithful. The one in the corner is the other problem. You stop naming them when they outnumber the spoons. One night, a section finally collapses. Not loudly, not all at once, just a slow groan. Then a thud, then snow. Actual snow. Inside your house. You stare at it. You'd laugh if you weren't so tired. You sweep it out with a pine branch. Cover the hole with a woven mat. The cold breathes in anyway. You move your bedroll again. You find yourself sleeping with your head under the table. Not for safety, for drip avoidance. Sometimes you lie awake and listen to the house around you. The beams creak. The wind hums through the cracks. You swear you can hear the roof asking for retirement. You whisper. Soon, a historical controversy. Were thatch roofs more durable than we think? Or just constantly patched? Most likely both. The truth is, durability in winter is measured in days. Can it last through the storm? Can it hold until morning? That's success. You wake one morning with snow on your pillow. You brush it off without thinking. The snow isn't a surprise anymore. It's just a roommate with boundary issues. The children think it's funny. They build a snow rat indoors. It stares at you with coal eyes and smugness. You melt it with a hot spoon. They rebuild it. You decide to let them win. You need the morale boost. Eventually, the worst of the leaks freeze over. That's winter's cruel trick. It stops the water by turning it into ice. The problem disappears. Technically, only to return later with interest. But for now, the drip has stopped. The roof is still sagging, but it's not crashing. The cold is leaking in, but you're used to it. You move over again, shift everything half a step to the left. You think, maybe, if you sleep diagonally, you won't wake up wet. This is not a solution, but it is an answer, because in a house built of mud and straw, you don't expect permanence. You just expect enough room to survive under the part that's still holding. When the river freezes, so do you. Fetching water sounds simple, romantic. Even a pail in each hand, a brisk walk to a nearby stream, a few cold splashes, maybe a moment of quiet reflection under a pale morning sky. That's the version you tell children. The real version involves bruises, curses, and at least one dislocated toe per household per winter. The stream used to gurgle. It doesn't anymore. It groans now, a tight, brittle sound that makes your teeth hurt just hearing it. The top layer is frozen solid, not decorative frost, actual, dangerous. Foot-thick ice that turns the act of getting water into something between blacksmithing and witchcraft. You bring the axe, not a dainty little hatchet. The full-size, wood-splitting, over your shoulder, swing like you mean it axe. You chop, not daintily, like someone trying to murder winter itself. The ice cracks in long, lazy lines that don't go where you need them to. You sweat, in sub-zero wind. When the hole finally opens, it's small and angry, like it resents the effort you just spent on it. You scoop water as fast as you can. You're not elegant. You're not poetic. You're shivering so hard, the bucket sloshes out half its contents before you take 2 steps back toward home. Historians agree, water was a full-time chore in winter. You fetched it, guarded it, rationed it. Some families had small wells. If they were lucky, you don't. You have the ice pit. You've named it. You and it are not friends. A little-known fact. In extreme cold, water carried in wooden buckets can start freezing on the walk back. You've seen it. A thin skin of ice forming before you even reach the door. Once, you dropped the bucket. The entire top layer stayed intact, like a frozen lid of mockery. You stared at it for a minute, then kicked it into next Tuesday. The path home is slippery. You walk like you're sneaking up on the ground. You fall anyway, once forward, once sideways, once directly into a snowdrift that's been waiting for you since November. You get up, brush off your dignity, and keep moving. Inside, the water goes into the storage barrel near the fire. You stir it occasionally to break up ice. You use it carefully, drinking, cooking, cleaning if you're feeling luxurious. The kids get a cup each per day. You get less, but pretend you're just not thirsty. You haven't bathed in weeks. You sponge off near the fire with water so cold it peels back your soul. You wash your hair only when you startle yourself with how loud it crunches. Soap is optional. Warmth is not. There's a historical record from the 15th century describing a woman who broke her wrist trying to crack a frozen chamber pot. You believe it? Everything freezes. Buckets, bowls, spoons, your own breath. You once set down a cloth soaked in warm water. It froze solid mid-fold. You kept it as a cautionary tale. You developed tricks. You wrap the water bucket in furs. You keep a hot rock in the bottom of the storage barrel. swapping it every few hours. You boil snow. It tastes like bark and regret, but it's better than nothing. And still, you never have enough. You dream about hot baths, not castles and feasts, just sinking into a deep wooden tub. Steam rising. Someone pouring warm water over your back, while your muscles slowly remember they're not dead. The dream always ends when the goat sneezes in your face. Controversy time. Some historians argue peasants didn't mind being dirty. They claim cleanliness wasn't a priority. You'd like to argue back, preferably while holding a frozen rag and pointing out that no one prefers to smell like turnips and anxiety. You're not neglecting hygiene. You're fighting physics. You wonder sometimes how much water you've hauled in your life. How many buckets? How many steps? How many bruises? You try to do the math. You give up when your fingers start to go numb from just holding the thought. Your neighbors have the same routine. You pass each other at the river like ships in the night, nodding solemnly like warriors returning from battle. No one speaks. Speaking wastes heat. You just raise your bucket in salute and trudge home. Sometimes, the hole refreezes before you're done. That's the worst, knowing you have to chop it open again, knowing your gloves are already wet, knowing your breath is a visible cloud of frustration. But you do it anyway, every day, because the fire needs water, the stew needs water, you need water, because winter doesn't care if your boots leak or your back aches or your soul is tired. It only cares that the river is frozen and that you keep showing up anyway. So you swing the axe, scoop the water, fall down, get up, and carry it all back again. Children don't get childhoods. They don't skip through meadows or chase butterflies. There are no toys, no carefree days, no lazy afternoons under shady trees. There are chores, always chores. Tiny hands doing big work because tiny mouths still need feeding. You wake the children before the sun does. Not because you're cruel, because the fire needs stoking and the stew needs stirring and your back needs 5 more minutes of pretending it doesn't hurt. The youngest rubs their eyes. The eldest is already pulling on stiff boots. They don't ask for breakfast. They know there won't be one for hours. You give them tasks. Fetch kindling. Break the ice on the water bucket. Stir the ashes. Sweep the floor. Check the goats. Patch the walls. You don't ask if they slept well. They didn't. You didn't either. Nobody did. One child starts coughing. You press your hand to their forehead. Warm. Too warm. You wrap them tighter and hope it passes. It has to. You can't afford for anyone to stop working. Not even them. A historical reality. Peasant children worked from the moment they could walk, carrying firewood, guarding livestock, helping in fields. Play wasn't banned, it just happened in slivers, between exhaustion and responsibility. A little-known fact, in some medieval villages, children as young as 7 were sent to other households to work as servants or apprentices, not for punishment, for survival. One less mouth at home, one more pair of hands somewhere else. You think about it. You hate that you think about it. You try to soften it. You let them sing while they sweep. You tell stories while they mend clothes. You call it a game when they chase rats out of the pantry. It's not. But sometimes they laugh. And that's something. You remember being a child once. Barely. You remember the cold, the hunger, the aching legs. You remember watching your own mother cry silently while peeling potatoes that had gone soft. You don't cry. You can't. Your kids are watching. Historians debate whether medieval children understood the world the way modern ones do. You think they understood enough. They knew when food was low. They knew when the weather turned. They knew when a neighbor didn't make it through the night. What else do they need to understand? Sometimes, you catch them daydreaming, staring into the fire, or out the slitted window, or up at the smoke, swirling through the rafters. You wonder what they see. A warmer house, a different life, bread. You want to let them dream. But you also need them to check the traps. So you nudge them softly. Go see if the snare caught anything. You say. They nod. Quietly. They don't complain. They just pull on a cloak, wrap a scarf around their nose, and disappear into the pale light. One day, the youngest asks if summer is real. You blink. Of course it is. You say, there's sun and grass, and apples so sweet they make your teeth hurt. They stare at you like you've described a myth. Maybe you have. You try to make moments. When the stew is good, you give them the best scoop. When the bread is fresh, they get the crust. You let them sleep next to the fire even if it means your feet freeze. You do these things without calling them love. But they are, and yes, sometimes they play. When the chores are done and the frost is less cruel, they build things out of snow. A snow goat, a fort, a crude little effigy of the steward that you make them knock down before someone sees. You smile. You laugh once. You tell them not to do it again. They play with the dog, too. She's patient with them, lets them tug her ears, lets them cry into her fur when they're too tired to pretend they're okay. You thank her with scraps from the pot. She accepts like a queen, and sometimes, when they think you're not looking, they sing old songs, rhymes from the priest, nonsense verses about chickens who steal bread. Their voices rise like smoke. Brief, fragile, beautiful. You don't interrupt. You just listen and hope it stays with them. Controversy time? Were peasant children loved or merely tolerated? Historians argue, you don't. You've watched a father give his last piece of bread to a child. You've seen a mother walk barefoot so her son could wear the only good boots. You've held your own child close when the wind howled like judgment and told them stories until they believed the sun would come back. Because even in a world that eats time and burns joy for warmth, you protect what little light you can. You tuck the children in. You check the coals. You whisper a lullaby in the dark. Not because it helps them sleep, but because it helps you remember that they're still here, still breathing, still children, even if they never got to be. You hear the news long after it matters. Someone knocks on the door. That alone is strange. Most people just shout from the road. But this one knocks. 3 slow, deliberate raps. You open the door with a handful of suspicion and a poker behind your back. Just in case. It's a traveler. Cloak heavy with frost. Face half hidden. Boots caked in half the countryside. You know the type. Messenger. Merchant. Maybe just someone too restless or unlucky to stay in one place. They ask for warmth. You offer a stool near the fire and a bowl of something that used to resemble soup. And then they start talking. The outside world comes spilling into your house like cold wind through a cracked wall. There's been a battle. Somewhere far. Maybe near the coast. Maybe in France. Kings are involved. Or pretenders. Or cousins of kings with ambitions and armies. You nod like you understand. You don't. But you listen. A well-known historical event finally reaches your ears. Edward III has claimed the French throne, or someone disputed it, or both. The war has started, or ended, or paused until spring. The 100 Years' War, you learn, might be beginning, or continuing, or just changing shape again. You chew your stew slowly. It doesn't taste any different. You ask, carefully, if this means more taxes. The traveler chuckles without humor. Always. A little-known fact. News in the 14th century could take months to reach the countryside, if it reached you at all. Battles were fought and lost and memorialized in stone, before the average peasant ever heard they'd happen. You could live your whole life under 3 monarchs and never learn the names of any of them. Still, the traveler shares a town burned, a bishop excommunicated, a new coin minted with a different face, someone sharper, younger. Not that it makes a difference when you're still bartering with eggs. They tell you about the plague in the east, quietly, like they're not supposed to. Rats, ships, whole towns silenced in weeks. You've heard whispers, but this is the first time you see someone's eyes tighten when they say it out loud. You spoon more stew into their bowl and say nothing. Historians debate how much the rural poor understood of the broader world. Some say they were completely disconnected. Others say the oral networks were strong gossip. Trade routes, church sermons all carried news in strange, half-true forms. You believe that. You once learned about a flood in Italy from a shepherd who couldn't read, but somehow knew which cities were underwater. The next morning, the traveler leaves. You give them an old scarf, and they give you a phrase in Latin you don't understand. Later, you'll repeat it to the priest and see his eyebrows twitch. It's always fun. The kids ask what a war really is. You tell them it's when people too rich to starve argue about who gets more land, and people like you carry the cost. You tell it like a joke. They don't laugh. You try to ignore the ripple that traveler left behind, but it clings to your thoughts. What happens if the army marches through here? What happens if the plague really is coming? What happens when the coin changes but the price of grain doesn't? You tell yourself nothing will change. It rarely does. You'll still plant in spring, still salt fish in summer, still chop wood until your hands forget what smooth skin felt like. The stew will still taste like roots and memory. The priest will still talk about sin and salvation in the same breath. Life rolls on, whether kings fall or rise, but you watch the road more now. Listen for footsteps that don't belong. You notice when someone new appears at the tavern, when the steward starts counting heads more carefully, when the priest stumbles in his sermon about pestilence. There's tension in the village, quiet but growing. People are talking more softly, glancing at their neighbors with eyes that say, "Are you hiding something?" Even when there's nothing to hide. The news spreads slowly, like smoke in damp air. A ship quarantined in a southern port, a noble's household wiped out, a bishop demanding public penance. Some say it's punishment for greed. Others say it's the devil. One man swears it's the stars. You say nothing. You're too tired for prophecy. Still, you mark it down not on paper, but in your memory. One more thing waiting just beyond the trees. One more shadow looming on the path. You carry on, because the stew must still be stirred. The roof still leaks. The fire still needs tending. The world might be collapsing somewhere else, but your chores haven't noticed. Yet, the priest is colder than the wind. He arrives at dawn, wrapped in wool and silence. His breath fogs like incense as he blesses the road with slow, deliberate steps. You see him from the window and groan, not from guilt, but from the effort it takes to look appropriately reverent. He knocks, always knocks, never barges in. That's not his style. He waits until someone answers, then steps inside like he owns the air. His eyes sweep the room, not with judgment, worse, with disappointment. "Peace be upon this house," he says. You nod. It's easier than asking why peace seems to skip yours. The priest is tall, stern, and perpetually dusted in ash from his own hearth. He smells faintly of old books and candle smoke. He says little unless he must, and when he does speak, it's in Latin first, English second, and passive aggression third. Today, he's come to check on the sacrament, and the souls, and the stew. You offer him a bowl. He blesses it. You wait. He blesses it again. You wonder what he knows. He asks how the winter is treating you. You lie. He asks if you've been fasting. You lie again. He asks if you've been praying. You smile and say yes while the dog snorts audibly from the corner. A historical event bubbles into your mind. Pope Gregory IX's reforms. The rise of the Inquisitors. The sharpening edge of the Church's authority. Not here. Not now. But the chill in the priest's voice suggests the wind is changing. Or maybe it always sounded that way, and you're only just hearing it. A little-known fact. Rural priests were often only slightly more educated than the peasants they served. Many couldn't read Latin fluently, though they recited it flawlessly. It was less about comprehension and more about rhythm, like singing a song you don't understand, but still fear. He pulls out his ledger, thin parchment, stained at the corners, sacred by implication. He flips to your name. You're there. You always are. He asks about the tithe. You produce a jar of pickled beets and a small loaf of grain bread. He nods, but makes a mark anyway. You don't ask what it means. Historians debate whether priests in medieval villages were spiritual leaders or tax collectors in disguise. You think they were both, shepherds with scales, always weighing your sins against your stores. He talks about sin, not loudly, not theatrically, just enough to make the fire dim a little. Envy, sloth, pride, the usual suspects. He throws in gluttony, which feels personally targeted, considering you just scraped mold off a turnip for breakfast. You listen. You nod. You agree. You keep your thoughts folded neatly in the back of your throat, like a handkerchief no one's supposed to see. He mentions the plague, casually, as if it's weather. It moves north, he says. God's justice flows like a river. You wonder who's damming that river before it reaches your village. You suspect it's no one. He stands, brushes crumbs from his robes. He gives the blessing, Deus vobiscum. You reply, Et cum spiritu tuo. You're not sure what it means anymore. Maybe you never were. Maybe that's the point. He leaves without another word. His boots mark the snow like punctuation. You watch until he disappears around the bend. The world is quieter when he's gone, but heavier. I too. The stew tastes saltier. You don't remember adding any. The kids ask if the priest is angry. You say no. You say he's tired. You say winter makes everyone sharp. They nod. But one of them hides the bread crust anyway, just in case he comes back for more. You remember when the priest was different. Younger. Louder. He used to tell stories. He used to laugh. Once he even danced at a wedding. Badly but bravely. That was before the bishop's visit. Before the sermons changed tone. Before every blessing started to feel like a warning. You still go to church. You still kneel. You still cross yourself at the right times. Not because you're afraid of hell. Exactly. But because in a world where roofs fall and rivers freeze and news comes late, ritual is something you can count on. Even if the priest's voice sounds more like thunder now than comfort. You whisper your prayers at night. Not for salvation, but for the roof to hold, for the soup to stretch, for the children to stay asleep, and maybe, just maybe, for the priest to remember how to laugh again. You start talking to the walls, not because you've lost your mind, not entirely, just because they're there, and they listen better than most people. Mud, straw, and timber, they remember everything, even if they never respond. You tell them things, little things, what the stew tasted like today, what the goat did that was vaguely insulting, which child stepped in what and tried to hide it with leaves. The walls absorb it all, quiet, patient, unjudging. There's comfort in it. You know every crack, every stain, every nail driven too far and bent into shame. That one spot above the hearth, You put that dent there the night the pot boiled over and the baby wouldn't stop crying. You threw a ladle at the ceiling. It missed. You never apologized. A historical event whispers into the corners. The Great Earthquake of 1348. Buildings fell. Churches cracked. People panicked. Some thought it was divine punishment. Others just blamed bad mortar. You imagine your walls groaning through it, not collapsing, just leaning a bit more, like tired shoulders. A little-known fact: wattle and daub walls were incredibly resilient, flexible, insulating, deceptively strong. They breathe, literally letting air pass through like lungs. You've thanked them more than once for keeping out wind and letting out smoke. They never say you're welcome, but you feel it anyway. Sometimes you draw on them. Not art. Not really. Just lines. Marks. Circles with little legs. You call one Harold. He guards the firewood stack. One of the kids adds a hat. Now he's Sir Harold. You nod in approval. Other times, you press your ear against them. Just to see. You hear creaks. Shifts. Whispers of rodents in the thatch above. One night you swear the wall sighed. Not loudly, just enough to make you feel less alone. Historians often overlook domestic details. The structure of medieval homes. The sounds they made. The way families interacted with them not just as shelters, but companions. You get it. Your house is less a building and more a body. The beams are ribs. The hearth is a heart. The floorboards groan like joints. You patch holes with anything you can find: old cloth, sheep's wool, even paper once, back when you were feeling bold. It worked, until the ink bled and told a ghost story across the west wall. Now you keep that one covered. The cold still seeps in, but you've learned its paths. You plug the main draft with rags and dried moss. You call that area the screaming corner. It doesn't scream anymore. Now it just mutters. You sweep often, not for cleanliness, but for sanity. Every corner gets a ritual pass. The soot line near the door gets smudged into a weird sort of calendar. You know it's Sunday when the cat sleeps beneath the stool instead of the bench. You start to believe the house has moods. On stormy nights, it shifts more, settles loudly. The roof pops like it's cracking jokes. The walls lean in, just slightly, as if to hear your thoughts. One night, the fire burns a little too high. You panic, throw snow onto it. The wall behind the hearth hisses in protest. A scorch mark is born. You stare at it for 10 minutes, then apologize. You think it forgives you? A historical controversy. Did medieval people feel at home the way we do now? Some say yes, pointing to charms. Decorations. Protective symbols scratched into lintels. Others claim it was purely utilitarian. 4 walls and a roof. Nothing more. You think the truth lives somewhere in the middle. Somewhere between necessity and affection. Because it's hard not to love something that shelters you. Even when it leaks. Even when it smells like smoke and onions and old sweat. Even when it creaks so loudly at night, you swear it's trying to confess something. You talk more now, not just to the walls, to the ceiling, the stool, the spoon with the crack that keeps pinching your lip. You narrate your life like it's a story someone might care about. And now, you whisper, "We peel this potato." Gently, tenderly, with dignity. The potato falls. You curse. The wall listens. Sometimes the kids join in. They give names to knots in the wood. One is a rabbit. One is a dragon. One is Uncle Fred, which is worrying. Because you've never had an Uncle Fred. And sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, when the wind howls like it's trying to scare the dark away, you place your hand on the wall and whisper, "Thank you." Not because you expect a response, but because some things deserve to be said out loud, even to mud and straw. Spring doesn't arrive. It creeps. No trumpet blast. No explosion of color. No sudden warmth that sweeps away the cold like a bedtime story turning its final page. Just a drip. Then another. The snow slouches. Ashamed of itself, the ice pulls back like a guest who's overstayed. And you notice, one morning, that your breath doesn't curl as sharply in the air. You step outside. You still see frost, still feel the bite. But the sky has changed. It's not brighter, just less gray. A slightly lighter shade of gloom. But you feel it. A softness. A shift. Then you hear it. A bird. Just one. Just a warble. But it stops you dead. You look toward the sound, like it's calling your name. It isn't. Birds don't care about you. But it sang anyway. And for that, you almost cry. A well-known historical fact. The first signs of spring were deeply sacred to medieval peasants. Not just relief, but rebirth. Snowdrops in the soil meant hope. Buds on branches meant life was still willing to happen. You don't need a priest to tell you it's a miracle. You can feel it in your knees. You chip away the ice from the tool shed. The door opens easier. The smell inside is musty and familiar. Like work. Real work. Planting work. Not just surviving, but building. You touch the hoe, the spade, the rake. Your fingers ache with the memory of blisters, and you smile. The mud returns before the warmth. That's the rule. You sink ankle deep with every step. The world smells like rot and growth. The chickens look confused. The goats look annoyed. The pig looks smug. You nod at him like you know what that's about. A little-known fact. Some peasants planted hunger gardens at the end of winter. Small patches of fast-growing greens like nettles, leeks, and herbs. You scratch at the earth behind the shed, looking for last year's garlic. You find half a bulb. You dance a little. Quietly, no one must see. The kids start asking if it's time to plant. You say not yet, but soon. You say it with reverence. Soon becomes a holy word. You repeat it often. To yourself, to the seeds, to the clouds. The fire burns less now. You don't need it as much. You let it die out by midday and sweep the hearth just to see the stones again. They're cracked, blackened, but they still feel like home. One morning, you see buds on the tree by the path. Tiny things, green and arrogant. You stare at them the way you'd stare at someone who owes you money and finally shows up to pay relieved, but not quite ready to trust. Historians argue whether spring was a time of joy or more work. It was both. The hunger's still sharp. The stores are empty. But now there's something to do about it. A field to clear. A fence to mend. You don't mind the effort. You mind the waiting. And now, finally, the waiting's ending. You begin repairs. The roof gets a patch. The walls get new daub. You scold the children into gathering thatch. They roll their eyes, but their cheeks are pink again. That's something. You unearth the seed sacks. You count them like treasure. They smell like dust and promise. Some are damp. Some are chewed. You sort. Shake. Hope. You say a quick prayer to no one in particular. And you sow the first row with your fingers crossed behind your back. And the sound. Spring has sounds. Water dripping from eaves. Wind that doesn't hiss. Birds arguing. Bees threatening to come back. The village is louder now. Voices travel. Doors open. Someone plays a lute badly from 3 houses down. You forgive them. They're still cold. Still risk. A late frost can undo everything. But you feel the sun on your neck for the first time in months, and you don't flinch. You breathe it in. You hang laundry outside, not because it needs to dry, because it can. You start walking farther. You check the river. It's moving again. Still cold. Still fast. But alive. You toss a rock in, just to see the splash. It's glorious. A controversy floats in. Some say peasants celebrated spring with fertility rites, bonfires, dances. Others deny it. You say, who cares? If someone gives you a reason to dance after that winter, you'll take it. You'll even wear flowers if it means bread comes back. The priest changes, too. His sermons grow softer, less fire, more fields. He talks about patience, about light returning, about the season of repentance. You think he means gardening. You nod like you agree. You talk to the walls less now, not because you've stopped needing them, because you're outside more. The house understands. You still thank it every night. You begin making plans, real ones. Not just don't die today, but plant barley here, trade eggs for linen, build a bench for summer. You find yourself smiling at stupid things. A bug, a breeze, a dry patch of ground. Life's coming back in bits and pieces. And you're still here. Bent, bruised, but blooming. Survival isn't glory, it's just next season. The snow is gone, mostly. Only a few reluctant patches cling to shadows like damp secrets. The mud is drying. The tools are out. And your back already aches in ways that feel like springtime nostalgia. You start each day earlier now. Not because the sun rises sooner, but because you can't sleep through the bird song. They're loud, brazen. They act like they own the sky again. You don't resent them much. The fields are ready, or close enough. You walk them barefoot for the first time in months, just to feel something that isn't ice or splintered wood. The soil is cold, but willing. You press your toes in, whisper something half prayer, half grumble, and begin. You plant fast. Too fast. You know better, but it's hard to pace yourself when every seed feels like a promise. You want results. You want sprouts tomorrow. You settle for blisters today. A well-known historical truth. Spring was the most dangerous time for peasants. Food stores were lowest. Weather still unpredictable. And all the labor had to begin again without rest. You know this. You feel it. Your body is tired. But your brain won't let it stop. A little-known fact. Some villages held plowing feasts once the first row was turned. Not big affairs, just bread, ale, maybe a song. You consider it. You've got half a loaf and a jar of pickled eggs. You sing something that might have once been a tune. The dog howls in protest. You call that a feast. The children are louder now. Laughter returns in bursts. You catch them racing sticks down the river. You tell them not to get wet. They do anyway. You fake anger. They fake remorse. The world spins on. The stew changes. More greens. Fresh onion tops. A bit of milk. Even you taste it and almost cry. Not because it's delicious, it's not, but because it isn't root. It's something new. Something growing. The animals perk up. The goat tries to escape again. That's how you know the season's real. She only plots in good weather. You repair your boots. The left sole is more patch than leather. You consider going barefoot. Then you remember last year's nettles. You keep the boots. Historians sometimes write about the peasant spring with awe, as if it was a season of triumph, rebirth, a celebration of the human spirit. You'd like to meet those historians, shake their hands, then hand them a rake and ask if they'd like to experience it properly. You don't feel triumphant. You feel sore. But you're still here. That counts for something. You count everything now. Seeds, eggs, days without frost. It's not about hoarding. It's about hope, dressed in practicality. The priest announces Easter is coming, or maybe just past. His calendar is as tired as the rest of you, but he smiles more now. Less fire, more warmth. He blesses your fields. You bless his knees. He groans louder than your floorboards when he bends down. A neighbor's roof collapses. Late but inevitable. You help. Everyone does. No one asks for thanks. That's the rule. You rebuild the beam. Retch on mold. Laugh when the goat eats the plans. Another controversy. Were medieval peasants happy? Some say no misery. Hunger. Fear. Others argue yes, community. Purpose. Faith. You say the answer changes by the hour. Right now. Right now. You're content. Tomorrow. You might scream at a cloud. Both are valid. You notice the wind smells different. Less like ash. More like grass. It sneaks through the window with secrets. You leave the door open longer now, just to hear what it has to say. You start teaching the children where to plant things, how deep to dig, which weeds to fear. You call it tradition. They call it boring. You show them anyway. They'll thank you when they're 40. Maybe. At night, you sit by the hearth, no longer desperate for its heat, but comforted by its memory. You remember winter like a nightmare you've written down and reread too many times. You survived it. That's all that matters. You hum more now. Nonsense tunes. Rhythms that match the rake, the bucket, the brush of wind against your cheek. The walls hum back. Probably. There's a crack in the ceiling you should fix. But not today. Today. You rest. You earned that. Tomorrow, you start again. Fields to weed. Paths to clear. Stools to mend. Life to live. Because that's what survival really is. Not conquest. Not drama. Just doing the next thing. And then the next. And then the next. So now, the wind is softer. The air no longer bites, it brushes. The soil warms beneath bare feet. The light lingers longer in the evenings, slipping through the cracks in your walls like a visitor who doesn't want to leave. And for the first time in months, you're not bracing yourself. You're breathing. The worst of it is over. Not forgotten, but folded away. You carry winter with you, of course, stitched into your joints. Your routines. The way you always check the firewood twice and listen too carefully at night. But it's behind you, mostly. The house is quiet now. Not empty, just settled. The stew simmers gently. The goat snorts in her sleep. The floor creaks, in that way it always does when it's trying to remind you it's older than your best memories. You don't mind. You're older now, too. You're not triumphant. You're not transformed. But you endured. And there's power in that. Quiet. Steady power. Like a root buried deep beneath the frost. Waiting for the thaw. Out the window. You see green. Real green. The kind that doesn't ask for permission. It just grows. And with it, you grow. Too. A little slower. A little wiser. A little softer around the eyes. So tonight, as you lie beneath a patched roof and an honest sky, you let yourself rest. No stories left to chase. No wolves at the door. Just the hum of a world turning forward. And your place in it earned. Simple. Warm. Sleep easy. Friend, you made it.